All right, hey everyone, welcome to another episode of Deep Dive. This one, super excited to have a guy I met last year, Ben from Umbra or Umbra Cash. What do you call it?
We usually just go by Umbra. Our domain is umbra.cash, but we just call it
Okay,
Project Umbra. Yeah.
super cool. Yeah, so I met Ben. We were on a panel together at DeFi Philly, and he
Yeah, that
was,
was a fun one.
yeah, you were like a super smart guy, which was cool. I was I was
Can
impressed,
I
and then you were like working on this, and I was like, oh, this is awesome.
can I get that in writing? I want to like put that on the website or something. Super smart guy. That'll be my new
Yeah,
title. Or
show it to your wife. Like he called me.
yeah, exactly. There you go.
It's, no, but it was, it was a great panel. And by the way, DeFi Philly coming around again next year,
Yeah,
July
that'll be
7th.
fun.
It'll be fun. I think I'll be a speaker there as well. So hopefully, and you're in the Philly area, right?
I am. Yeah, I live right outside of Philly, very close to the city, and lived and grown up here most of my life.
Awesome. Yeah. Fly, Eagles, fly.
That's
Well,
right. Playoffs are
anyway,
coming up.
yeah, how did you get started with Umbra? I guess we can just start there.
Sure. So Umbra is actually born of a Vitalik Buterin tweet, believe it or not. So he tweeted saying like, "Hey, it would be cool if we had some kind of stealth addresses on Ethereum." And I was like, "What's a stealth address? I don't know what that is." And then learned a little bit about the concept, which had previously been implemented on Bitcoin. There was some BIP years ago, BIP 43 or something like that, Bitcoin improvement proposal, and it existed on Bitcoin. I don't think many people used it on Bitcoin because, like a lot of things on Bitcoin, like the UX and stuff is a little challenging and whatnot. And but I learned about the concept, and I agreed with Vitalik that this would be really cool to build on Ethereum and very feasible to build on Ethereum. And so, along with Matt Solomon, who works at our company as well, which is called Scopelift, we threw it together as part of a hackathon project for I think it was Hack Money, the online. It was an online hackathon in early 2020, like when the pandemic had first started. So there was like an
Nice.
online hackathon. We threw it together. It did really well. Got a decent amount of attention at the hackathon. Won a couple prizes and whatnot. And we were able to get some grants after that to work on it. And we've just been doing that since then. So it's all grant funded. And we ended up going live about a year after the hackathon version on mainnet. So in like mid 2021. And yeah, now it's continuing to grow, and we continue to kind of push it forward as best we can.
Cool. So you guys it's been live now for what, about a year, would you say? Or
Year and a half, I guess.
year and a half?
Yeah. So like maybe June 2021 or something around those line, maybe May, actually. I don't remember exactly, but like just about a year after we started working on the hackathon
Nice.
version, we shipped to mainnet, and then later shipped to Optimism, Arbitrum, and Polygon. And so it's been live across all four of those networks. And yeah, grew a lot in 2022, like a lot of usage over the past year. So it's been cool.
Yeah, well, we can kind of get into what it is for people, and then I'll ask you more about who the users are. So I guess
Good question.
yeah, we'll just jump right into whiteboarding. That'll be fun. We'll just
Sure.
all right, I'm switching over to speaker mode and pinning myself so then people can see the whiteboard.
Perfect.
At some point I'll show your face again.
No one wants to see that anyway. It's fine.
This is Umbra. And okay, so who would be, I guess a typical user would be somebody on Ethereum, and they have, what do you do just ETH, I'm guessing?
No, so Umbra works for it works for ETH and any ERC20 in terms of
Okay.
like the smart contracts support any ERC20 token. Now we do have a relayer service that's involved, and we'll talk about that. And right now on the relayer service, we only support a limited number of tokens, but the contracts support any number.
Okay. So this is Secret Sally. She has we'll say she has three, we'll just call them wrapped ETH tokens or something.
Sure.
And then she would say she wants to keep them private, right? That would be the use case here.
So not exactly that. Yeah, this is like
Okay.
a good place to start because yeah, Umbra is a privacy tool, and in crypto in general, I think when you hear privacy, everyone's brains go straight to the mental model of a mixer, right?
Right.
And Umbra is not a mixer. So just to review real quick, a mixer is something where it's like, I have these coins in a wallet, probably a doxed wallet, right? I want to retain control of these funds, but I want to move them into a wallet that isn't doxed, and so that people, don't recognize that these are my funds. These funds belong to me anymore.
Yes.
And so you take your funds on one end in the doxed wallet, you put them into the mixer. These exist on Bitcoin. Obviously, we have Tornado Cash on Ethereum, now controversially, but you put the coins into the mixer, and then on the other side, you withdraw the coins out of the mixer. And because of the properties of the mixer, which I think we don't have to go into that. Most people understand at a high level at least how it works.
We actually did a Tornado Cash deep dive, so it's like 3 months ago. So if you're
Perfect.
watching this, go watch the old one.
Go back and watch that one to see what Umbra does not do. But and then you take the coins out on the other side, still in a wallet that you control, but that wallet on chain, the chain of custody is now broken, and so it's not obvious to, or really, hopefully not at all. There's no way to determine just by looking at the chain that that those funds are now yours, that this new wallet is one that's in your control. So that's not what Umbra does. Umbra is about if you want to pay or be paid on chain without the economic relationship being obvious. In other words, I'm a sender, I want to pay someone, and I'm going to send them funds, but I don't want it to be. So the fact that I'm sending funds is obvious, right? It comes out of my wallet, that's clear. But where I'm sending the funds, that's the part that is obfuscated. So the receiver is the stealth address, and that stealth address can't be linked directly to the owner of the stealth address.
So this would be like
how all that works.
There's like the classic example. Sorry, Sally. If Sally wanted to get an abortion, and she wanted to pay for it, and
wow.
she didn't want people
expect
to know
us to go there.
But this is like what people who have used this one for Tornado Cash. Like if she wanted to keep her abortion private, she could.
Yes. Yes. Let's move away from the topic of abortion as quickly as we possibly can. but yes.
Okay, so there would be the ideal use case would be then there would be somebody over here. This would be the receiver, right?
Yeah, so you can call him Bob or whatever. So he's the receiver.
Yep.
So Sally wants to pay Bob. She wants to send funds to Bob, but neither Sally nor Bob want to make it obvious on chain that Sally has paid him, right? So that's what Umbra does.
So and there's a smart contract on Ethereum, I'm guessing, deployed?
Yes, there's a smart contract involved, but it actually does a lot less than you would expect, and we'll get into why that is. But yes, that is involved.
So then I guess how would it work? So if she wants to send 2, she would then deposit them into here? Or do they get deposited?
Interestingly enough, it depends. It depends on whether it's ETH or whether it's ERC20 tokens. So if it's ETH, it does not even get deposited into the contract. It actually just goes straight to Bob's stealth address. If it is an ERC20 token, it goes into the contract, and then Bob's stealth address has the right to withdraw it.
Right.
So maybe actually something that would be helpful is we can back up and we can talk about like how to have a mental model of what Umbra does, and then we can talk about how it does that.
Sure. Yeah, let's build the mental model.
Cool. So the mental model would be like, okay, like let's say Sally wants to pay Bob. They don't want it to be obvious on chain that Sally is paying Bob, right? One way that they could facilitate that between themselves would be for Sally to say, hey, Bob, I want to send you some funds. Give me a new address. And Bob goes, oh, okay. And he generates a new address, a public-private key pair locally, and it gives him a new address. On chain, that address has never been seen before, right? And so nobody knows who owns it. And then out of band, in their Telegram chat or whatever, he sends that address to Sally and says, Sally, send the funds here. And then Sally sends the funds to Bob, right? So what would happen in that case, if anyone observed the chain, what happened is Sally sent funds to a fresh address. And who controls that fresh address is not obvious to anyone except Sally and Bob, who communicated out of band in order to facilitate that payment. So what Umbra does is basically that, except it makes it non-interactive. In other words, Sally can pay Bob at any time, any amount. It goes to a fresh address, what looks like a fresh address on chain, But Bob is the only one who can generate the private keys for that fresh address. So we call that fresh address a stealth address. It's a one-time use address that gets created on the fly by Sally in order to send private funds to Bob, but only Bob can ever create the private key for that new stealth address where the funds reside. Does that kind of make sense at a high level?
Yeah, so if I'm getting it right, she would send like, if it's like ETH, I'm guessing, so it would like probably pass through the contract and then it would come into this new address, right?
Mm-hmm.
This new stealth address.
Yeah.
And then Bob can go and grab it at any time, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And that would be how it would work.
Yeah.
Okay. And then if it was an ERC20, it would get deposited directly into here, and then the stealth address via Bob's call would pull
so
it
that's where the relayers come into play, right? So the challenge with ERC20 tokens, let's go back to that scenario that we described where they coordinate this out of band. So if Bob gets like DAI sent into his fresh brand new address that he's never used before, he can't actually just move those DAI out of that address, right? Because he needs to put in ETH in order to pay for the gas to move it. So that ETH has to come from somewhere. And if Bob just naively sends that ETH from his doxed wallet into that fresh address, he's just given a pretty big hint that that's an address that he controls on chain, right? So that's where the smart contract and the relayer system come into play. So Sally generates a stealth address for Bob, and at some point we need to talk about how Sally does that. But she generates the stealth address, but instead of sending the funds to the stealth address, she sends the tokens to the contract, and she tells the contract, hey, this is the address that has the right to claim these funds out of the contract. And then what Bob does is when he sees that those funds have been received, and we need to talk about how he can see that, that's another thing to talk about, but when he sees that those tokens have been received by the contract, he signs a message with the stealth address, which again, only he can generate the keys for. He signs a message, he submits that to the contract, to the Umbra contract, and he says, hey, Umbra, give me my, sorry, he doesn't submit it to the contract. He sends it to a relayer. Yeah. Thank you.
Okay.
You were ahead of me. He sends it to a relayer and he says, hey, relayer, withdraw these funds, from the Umbra contract. And the relayer submits the signed message to the contract. The contract verifies that the signature is correct for the stealth address. The contract then sends a small fee to the relayer to compensate them for the gas that they've paid, and sends the balance to Bob, who gets his ERC20 tokens wherever he wants them.
Yep. Cool. No,
that's a pretty common pattern, right? Relaying and charging for the tokens. So
yeah, no, this is super cool. So is this the only fee in here? Does Alice and Bob have to pay a fee?
Good question. So there is another fee. We call it a toll, T-O-L-L. When you send in Umbra, you pay a very small toll. On mainnet right now, it's actually 0, and on other networks, it's like on the order of like 3 to 5 cents or something like that. Okay. The reason that you pay that is it's a spam prevention method, and the reason that we need a spam prevention method has to do with how you determine whether you've received a payment or not. So we'll, I'm sure, get into this more detail. But at some point, you have to scan payments made through Umbra and find the ones that are for you.
So you basically have to like loop through all the messages, all the events on the chain, and
yeah. So it's an O of N. It grows linearly, so it's an O of N problem.
This is a problem with Tornado Cash as well.
Yes, it's a problem with Tornado Cash. It's a problem with a lot of stuff.
This is a problem with ETH and EVM chains in general.
Yeah, and there are ways to deal with it, and we've implemented some of them. There's a lot more things that we can do on top of that. There's no way to make it, so to date, there's no solution that makes it not O of N, but there are ways to get big constant speed ups from the problem. And then it's an open research question, one that we're interested in, as to whether there is a way to do these kind of, what we call them, announcements without at like say O log of n, right, or something like that, or sorry, O log n. But that's TBD. But yeah, I mean, the toll is there to prevent someone from sending a bunch of wash payments through the system, which would create a third, or like an externality, basically a cost on all the other third parties who then have to scan through them to look for their own transactions.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's maybe you and I should just start an API that returns returns things based on your address. It'll be
well, so
popular.
that's probably a good way to segue into a little bit about how the actual mechanism of the stealth address generation occurs, because that actually relates to that. And one of the things that you can do is you can allow a third party to do the scanning for you, right? And there are obviously privacy implications for that, and so like that's one of the interesting things to unpack. But so basically, the way that this works, maybe I'm trying to think if it's worth actually. I mean, this is a deep dive, right? So maybe we actually write out some equations here. But
sure. So do we want to take a mental picture of this and erase it, or keep it up?
Yeah, I don't know.
We can go to the side depending on how.
Yeah, why don't we just do the side? It's not too complicated, right? But the sort of short story is that we actually just use pretty straightforward elliptic curve cryptography to do this, and it's kind of interesting that it works and that it is as simple as it is. It's kind of an interesting property of the way elliptic curve cryptography works. So when you have an address is basically generated from a private public key pair, right? I think most people have some idea of that, but so you can, if you wanted to, you could write like small p for the private key, and that's tied to and that's tied to big P, which is the public key, right? So
is the big P, I think it's the hash of the private key, right?
For an address, yes. So when you generate an address, you hash that. Exactly. It's just the hash of your public key.
It's the first 20 bytes of the hash, right?
I forget the super details, but yes, I think that might be right. Yes. Well, so let's see. It's it's 64 characters in hex, right? So what does that work out to? Whatever that is. Yes. So then what's an interesting property of this is that if you take that small p, okay, and you multiply that small p by a random number, so you can just call it r or g or whatever, and this is elliptic curve multiplication, by the way. So you multiply it by r, and then you take that big P, the public key, and you multiply that by r, right? What you actually generate is a new public-private key pair via that multiplication, right? So the result of this is a new public-private key from which a new Ethereum address can be derived. But if you have so what this means is if someone has the public key and they create a random number and they multiply that public key by the random number, they've created a new address, and only the holder of the private key for the original address can determine the private key for the new address, and they can do that just by multiplying by the same number r that you multiply, if that makes sense.
But you have to do, both parties then have to know r.
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
So very good question. So both parties somehow have to know r. Obviously, Bob could send r, or Sally could send r to Bob, but then they're collaborating again, and it's not non-interactive, which is what we're going for. So when you make a payment in Umbra, what you do is you actually encrypt r with the public key, the same public key. So you do asymmetric encryption. You encrypt that number and you announce it on chain. So there's an event on chain emitted by the smart contract. And you actually don't have to encrypt PK because the receiver has PK. But you encrypt R.
All you do is encrypt R.
You encrypt R, yes.
Encrypt R.
And I'm skipping a little bit of like implementation details, but this is like the high level idea of like how it works, right? So you encrypt R and you put that encrypted data on chain.
Well, what does that look like? I mean, what does encrypt look like? Is it just like Are you hashing it? Are you, is this some sort of
So it's just like asymmetric encryption. It's like
okay.
the same kind of thing you would do if you like did a Diffie-Hellman and you were sending private messages back and forth to each other, right? Like
Okay.
it's literally just encryption. So it's like someone has a public key. I want to send. They've published their public key. I want to send them a message and a private message. I use their public key to encrypt it, and therefore I know only they can decrypt it with
So
their
you
private key.
encrypt it with their public key.
Correct. Yeah.
So then that's how you enter it. Yep.
Asymmetric encryption.
And then you put that on chain, and then the other person, they would basically, this is where the scanning comes in. They would scan all of these messages, trying to find which one they can decrypt.
Exactly. Yep. And again, there's a bunch of implementation details here that we're glossing over, but just in terms of understanding how the protocol works at a conceptual level, that is how it works. So you come to Umbra, you log in, and then you connect your wallet, and then you scan all of those messages, attempting to decrypt them, and the ones that you can decrypt are for you, and then you can look at like, well, how much was sent, and etc.
Yep. Cool.
So now a little bit of tying that back into the thing that you mentioned, which was, could a third-party service do this for you? One of the things that we do is when the user generates their keys. So, okay, a couple points here. The way that a user generates that that public key that is going to be used by Umbra is they sign a special message that is.
So this is not a public key in the terms of the Ethereum address.
It's not in the usual usage of
right.
Umbra, and I'll explain a little bit more what I mean there. But the kind of standard usage of Umbra, it's not your standard Ethereum private key, and the reason is private public key, and we don't want you having to move around your private key or paste your private key into a web app or anything like that in order to find your Umbra funds. So we know you already have a wallet. We're assuming that you have an Ethereum wallet set up. You want to receive these private payments. We can generate a new private public key pair by having you sign a special message and then using the hash of that signature to generate the private public key pair. And basically, as long as you protect your core Ethereum wallet and you don't sign this message in any other context, right, except from a trusted Umbra client, then you'll never lose your Umbra private key, but no one else will ever be able to generate the signature necessary to access your funds. So that's also a common pattern. It's used by some L2s and different wallet providers and stuff like that. So,
but theoretically, you could, like in the future, if wallets support this kind of thing, you could just use more plain Ethereum addresses.
Yes, it could be baked in at the wallet level, and that's definitely something we would love to see in the future. And I have some thoughts on how paths to get there. But for just ease of use right now, you sign this message. Now, what we do is we actually don't just we split that hash in two, and because there's enough entropy there, and we use one part of the hash to generate an address or a public private key pair that we call the viewing key, and the other is the spending key. And we do that for exactly this reason, right? One of them, the viewing key, is what is used by the sender to encrypt that random number, which they publish on chain. And then the spending key is the one that is actually used to generate the private key that for the public private key pair for the stealth address itself. So what that means is that you can now separate concerns between who can see the funds that you've received and who can withdraw the funds that you've received.
So you could give the IRS the viewing key, for instance.
Correct. You could give the IRS the viewing key and say, look, there's no income hiding anywhere. Here's what I've received.
Yeah. But
it doesn't allow them to spend that, right? You could give it to a third-party service, right? Like, say you were using this for invoicing, right? You don't want you're a consultant. You don't want everyone to know how much you've been paid by everybody else. So you send invoices with Umbra. You receive payment. But maybe there's an invoicing service that integrates with Umbra. You're totally fine with your invoicing service knowing who's paying you and how much. You just don't want all that data public on chain, right? So your invoicing service could scan for you and for their customers. They could notify you of when you received a payment. then you just have to go click a button to withdraw it, and you don't have to do the scanning process yourself. So that's the purpose of splitting those two things up.
Yep. Super cool.
So then the last step, once we have those two keys, is we have the user publish those two keys in an on-chain registry contract.
And is this a mapping from the ETH address to?
Exactly. Yep. So your ETH address to your public-private key pairs, or sorry, your two public keys, not private.
No, not private.
That would be bad.
Yeah.
Right. So now going back to our example here in the middle of the board, when Sally wants to pay Bob, her first step, she doesn't have to coordinate with Bob. She looks on chain. She takes his normal ETH address, which she already has, or she knows because of ENS, because we have ENS integrated. She looks up in the registry what his two public keys are, and she uses those to do the address generation and the encryption that she needs to in order to make the payment to him.
Yep. If Bob doesn't have one, can Alice or can Sally make one for him?
Yeah, so Sally can't make it, right? Because she would have to have the private key material in that case. What we do have, so in our app, now, so a couple of things. Based on the system that I described, Umbra has an anonymity set based on who has published keys in this registry, right?
Correct.
If you assume that all payments are made to people who have published these keys, then there's this anonymity set issue where it's like, well, I don't know who Sally paid, but she paid one of these, I think right now we have, I forget, it's at least tens of thousands, it might be in the hundreds of thousands now, of accounts that have registered, right, keys. But I know that she's paid somebody in this set. To avoid that limitation, we actually built into the front end, because there's nothing in the core protocol that requires that, right? That's just sort of a convention of the way that it's implemented. You could use any public key, including the one, as you mentioned, that underlies your Ethereum address. So we have the ability in the web app, you can turn on advanced mode, and after you've clicked through a bunch of warnings that you probably shouldn't do this, you can actually send funds directly to any Ethereum address that's been seen on chain before, and it will use the public key associated with that Ethereum address to do everything that we just described. And
it can also use the ETH key.
Yes.
Basically.
Yeah. It can also use their Ethereum key. Now, the one caveat there is they have to have done at least one transaction, because otherwise you can't recover that public key. Because remember, the address, as you mentioned, is the hash of the public key, not the public key itself. But as long as they've done one transaction on chain, we look at that transaction, we recover their public key, we use that to do the whole process here. So now your effective your effective anonymity set is any address that's ever done a transaction on chain, basically, because you could be deriving the public key from any of those. And so although we discourage usage of that feature because it's dangerous if you don't know what you're doing, it is possible. And so it allows us to kind of grow the anonymity set. Now, if you were like a security researcher and you were trying to reverse Umbra transactions or something like that, you could probably make a safe assumption that most transactions don't do that, right? But it at least adds a little bit of complexity to someone who is trying to to reverse Umbra transit. Thank you. Yeah, I can't. I'm not going to even try again to pronounce that word. Yeah.
Cool.
So, cool. Do you have any questions at this point?
Yeah, so I mean, I guess the anonymity set of the whole thing is you would have this, but then it's also sort of limited by who's sending it too, right? Because if there's one person going through this contract, so even if a bunch of people go and register, if there's only one person that actually puts funds in, she probably paid Bob, right?
Yeah, I mean, if you know something about Sally and Bob having a relationship off, out of band or whatever. Yes, I mean, if you were, there are lots of things that you could do to try to break Umbra's privacy, right? And actually, there's a couple of researchers in Europe. I'm trying to remember what university they're at, who are actually right now doing some analysis themselves. I think somebody is doing it as part of their postdoc work, or maybe undergrad research work. I can't remember. It might be a master's or something. but we've been communicating with them because it's really interesting, and we're curious to see what their results are. Where they're trying to look at the history of transactions on Umbra and come up with strategies for making reasonable guesses at who was paying who based on what they can observe on chain. And there are a few that are really obvious and straightforward ways to do that. So, and actually, I'm kind of curious, Nick, if you can, looking at the system so far, if you can find like the one really big one that's super obvious.
I mean, is there any? I guess the next question was going to be: is do you pin these into a certain size, the amount that you push through?
No, so that's a good one. Yeah, and that's definitely one, right? So, like if every like let's say someone wants to use Umbra for an e-commerce application and they charge like whatever amount for their product, they're selling something for
right.
$132.78. Like every transaction that you see going through Umbra for exactly that amount, you might say like, oh, well, there's a pretty good chance that this e-commerce company that's using Umbra and sells a product for that amount, that's what this transaction is about. So that's a good one. Yeah. There's actually one that's even more obvious, and it's probably so obvious that like you know it instinctively, and so you're not even thinking about it. But for an average user, it's actually a harder problem to solve than you would think, which is what do you do if you're Bob once you've got the funds in the stealth address, right?
How do you claim them, right?
Correct. Where do you send them afterwards while maintaining your privacy? So if you're Bob and you take the funds that you've received into a stealth address, okay, great. Right now, nobody knows that you control that address. But if you send it straight to, your doxed bob.eth wallet, like, well, now we can guess pretty well that Sally just paid Bob. And
right.
So it's that post-withdrawal challenge that remains, I would say, like the biggest challenge for actually effective privacy within the system. And that is something that we have.
Especially because you need gas to do anything with it.
Yeah, so we sort of solved that problem with the ERC20 thing, right? Like, or with the relayer system.
Yep.
So that is one of the things that we've at least solved that. You don't have to fund the stealth address in either to withdraw them. But even with that, like if you have the relayer, just send them to your Docs wallet. That doesn't do you any good, right?
Right.
So I would say so there are a bunch of things you could do. One would be like you could just move them into a new wallet. If you received ETH, you could move that ETH into a new wallet and just use that as a wallet separately from that point on. Something that I think is the way that a lot of users actually use it right now is they're moving the funds like straight out to an exchange, basically. So we've heard, for example, from DAO contributors who get paid by the DAO with Umbra, maybe from a multi-sig or something like that. And they don't want that to be obvious on chain, like what they're getting paid and, by the DAO and whatnot. But they don't, they're not like trying to hide that from like a state actor or something like that. And so they'll get paid via Umbra and then they'll just withdraw their DAI or whatever straight to an exchange so that they can turn it into fiat or move it back out from the exchange to another address. So yep. It's giving them some measure of privacy, but it's not like you're using Monero or Zcash or something where everything is completely shielded. And so that's actually one of the challenges as well, not just solving that problem, but also communicating to users that it is a problem, right? That they have to think about. It seems like it should be obvious, but again, like the mental model that most people have of privacy in the blockchain ecosystem has been anchored on the idea of mixers. And so people come to Umbra and they think it's something like a mixer when it's really nothing like a mixer. And so they get paid, they receive a payment and then they think, well, it was stealth, so I can just move it anywhere. That's not really how it works, right? Like, if the wallet that you're sending it to is doxed, then you've probably doxed that, the nature of that payment for anybody who's willing to click a few links on Etherscan, they can figure it out, right? So,
yep. Yeah, I mean, maybe you could use it as a mixer if you had 50 people all deposit one ETH in there and 50 people on the other side create brand new addresses somehow with ETH, and then maybe.
Yeah, but even then, if you just send it straight out to a wallet you control, it like isn't really.
But I mean, that's the problem with Tornado Cash too.
It is. Yeah. Yes, it's at the limit. It's a problem with everything. Yeah, you're right.
Yeah.
But there are some potential further solutions to that. So one of the things that we built into the Umbra contract that currently isn't leveraged in the Umbra front end itself, but is there, is what we call a post-withdrawal hook. So when you're withdrawing those funds, you can not only say where to send the funds, but you can call into arbitrary smart contracts that have implemented this hook interface so that they can do other things with the funds that are coming out. And so basically, so that just gives at least, a surface area for us to, in the future, implement things that could potentially provide additional privacy for our users getting paid on Umbra on the withdrawal side. Or the way that I like to say it is we'd like to get to the point where we make it easy for users to make privacy preserving decisions. Like they don't have to know too much about the details. It's just like a button that they can click and then, things happen and they've made a decision that helps preserve their privacy. So if they want to, if that's what they're looking for. So one example of that, just as a simple example, is like, let's say you receive DAI, right? And you want to do what I described before. You just got a big disbursement of a grant or something from a DAO. And you want to, you want to put that somewhere, and you want to eventually you're going to slowly pay it out, or maybe you want to put it into Aave and earn some yield while you're doing the work or whatever. You could withdraw that DAI, and you could, in the process of withdrawing it using this post-withdrawal hook, you could swap some of the DAI for ETH, and therefore the address that you send it to, this fresh address, would have some ETH and the rest of it DAI. And then you could just use that address moving forward to do whatever that you wanted to do. You could import the private key into, or you could already have the private key in your MetaMask, whatever, and you could use that DAI and that from that address to make payments, do things in DeFi, etc. Right? Whereas right now, if you have ERC20 and you dump them in an address, they're stuck there, right? So like that's one example of something that we could build. The other thing that I think it gives us the possibility to do in the future is integrate with more privacy solutions that come out and help tackle these problems, right? So one thing that we're looking at right now, and we're actually doing some unrelated work with them, but we really like the project, or we're interested in the project at least, I'd say, is the project called Railgun. So that's a privacy tool that it's not a mixer either, but it's more of like a shielded on-chain address. I won't go into explaining Railgun because it's about Umbra, but the point is, like, if things like that get built, one of the things that your post-withdrawal hook could do is deposit your payments that you receive into a shielded Railgun address, right? So now you get payment with a stealth address. The sender doesn't have to have any kind of pre-existing setup or anything like that. They can just pay you through Umbra with a normal address. And then you can withdraw the funds straight into a shielded address with Railgun and use them within the Railgun shielded ecosystem. So now you've received funds privately and you've preserved that privacy moving forward. So I think as the ecosystem gets built out, the usefulness of stealth addresses for payments grows if we can integrate with services like this.
Well, could you, like, I know it's like illegal to use Tornado Cash as a US citizen. So could you call a stealth address and then have it call Tornado Cash and then get around something? It's like,
so yeah, I mean, we thought about a Tornado Cash integration for quite a while. We actually even prototyped some integrations with it. The specifics around Tornado Cash's implementation made it pretty challenging, right?
Because you would have to find the ZK message.
Yeah, there's a bunch of things. Like one of the things that makes it really challenging is the amounts, right? So Tornado Cash requires fixed amounts. So like if you get paid like 0.98 ETH or something, now you have to do what? Like 9.1 deposits into Tornado Cash and then 8.01. It gets really tricky really fast. The gas costs get prohibitive really fast. And then you have to manage all the proofs, and it just, it makes life really challenging. But it is, in theory, possible. I don't think Tornado Cash had it wasn't the right architecture for an integration with Umbra. But other things like Railgun or other projects in the future might provide something that kind of dovetails more nicely.
Well, or I would wonder, you could have, like, if you were going to do a hack on someone, you could throw it into a stealth address and call a hook. Like if I'm going to go manipulate, you know, the Uniswap oracle on that's Aave's calling or something. You could throw it into a stealth address first, have it call it, and then not that you wouldn't be able to track it back. Maybe you would. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean,
But like,
that
because
in
then
that
you're just
case,
losing all the money. So like, you're fine, you know, you're fine losing it because you're gonna make it up with some other address, and it would be
true. I mean, so what I always say is that like Umbra really doesn't, if you already control the funds, Umbra doesn't really gain you anything, right?
you're right.
It doesn't break that link, which is, you know, what like a mixer or another kind of service, you know, like if you're a hacker and you have funds under your control and you want to still have them under your control, but not be obvious that they came from the hack, like Umbra is not really
Right.
about that, right? Umbra is about like uh, a payment situation where you want to avoid the thing that you're not trying to break the relationship, or you're not trying to like take the funds and break the relationship or the path between the funds. What you're trying to do is not reveal the economic relationship between the two entities who are transacting, right? Like that's what Umbra is really aiming to do. So Sally
Sure.
has the funds, she wants Bob to have the funds, but she doesn't want to make it obvious that she sent the funds to Bob. And actually, like Tornado Cash is not useful for that at all.
No.
There's really no good way to do that, except like unless you like send them to a new address, you know, you go through Tornado Cash first and then you pay Bob, right?
Yep.
That's a lot of extra work. Umbra basically allows you to make payments without revealing the relationship that exists. So that's the real
Back to my abortion
core of
example.
it. If you must, yes, but
Perfect. Yeah. No, that this is, yeah. So I guess what are next steps, I guess, from here? You know, like, is there
yeah.
any way, I'm trying to think, is there any way to take this cross chain or things you can do
That's
there?
that's a really interesting question, right? So we're deployed across several chains,
Yep.
but our strategy right now is basically like each deployment is its own like universe, right? Like if you're on Polygon, like Sally's on Polygon, she wants to pay Bob on Polygon. Like fine, you use Umbra on Polygon to do that. The question of like, can you do a stealth payment across chains is an interesting one. I think it's something we haven't thought too deeply about it, but I think it's something that could be done perhaps with like the post-withdrawal hooks or a slightly different architecture or something. So that's definitely a possibility. I think for me, I want to see the cross-chain ecosystem itself just sort of like mature more. And I think, you know, like there'll be more building blocks to do things with that in the future. And then an architecture for stealth addresses like across chains might become more obvious. Some of the things that we're working on, so one of the things we've mentioned is like that scanning problem, right? It's an O of N problem. There's, you know, a bunch of basically what I would describe as like engineering hacks that you can do to make that a lot quicker. So, you know, some of them are like pretty obvious, like caching things. And then some of them are a little less obvious or a little more advanced. Like there's a concept called view tags from Monero.
This
Um,
MU
eh,
or
sorry, View, VIEW.
oh, okay.
And I won't get into the details really of how that works, but like basically it can provide, we've done some initial prototyping and actually there's another researcher that we're talking with about this. And he, like we've seen like maybe we can get up to like a 6x constant time speed up on scanning using this approach that already exists on Monero. So that's an interesting thing that we're looking into. I think, like I already said, some of the post-withdrawal stuff we're eager to build out more. There's just some like straightforward like features that would be useful that we're working on. So like one of the things we have going on right now is we're building a like bulk payment option. So like right now for each payment that you want to do in Umbra, you have to go make a payment, you know, do the
Yep.
next payment, do the next payment. But like it would be nice if I could, as a sender, just say like, you know, I'm like, let's say I'm paying a bunch of vendors at the end of the month, like this much to this person, this much to this person, and then it just boom does all 6 stealth transactions all at once. So we're working on that right now, and that should probably ship in a month or two. And then another thing that I'm really excited about is we are working with we're talking with it's the same researcher, the same guy who's doing the view tags stuff. He is also, we're working with him to develop an EIP or basically a standard for stealth addresses on Ethereum. So the goal is for something that is very flexible, open, anyone can plug into, but also has enough, again, flexibility to support other encryption schemes in the future, and in particular with an eye toward like a post-quantum encryption scheme. So like just something that's generic. Yeah, we're not doing any post-quantum stuff right now, to be clear, but something that is generic enough in its implementation that you could, instead of just using elliptic curve math like we are now, you could plug in like some other scheme in the future and get the same benefits without having to like redeploy a whole new system from the ground up. And then another thing, like you alluded to, is we think in the very long term, or maybe medium to longer term, it would be awesome if this kind of thing was built into or supported directly in some way by wallets. And so thinking about strategies for how to go about that is interesting. And yeah, I think that's a lot of it. Some of the things that we're currently working on right now. I'm going to do a shameless plug right now, which is to say Umbra is completely grant funded. And so we've gotten grants from the EF, from MolekDAO, from other places as well over the years. But one of our big sources of funding comes from Gitcoin grant rounds. And so there's another one of those coming up soon. And, because of the way they do quadratic matching, if you want to give a buck or two, a die or two, every little contribution helps. So if you want to cut that out, that's fine. But but I would just say like that would be awesome to get support from folks for the project.
No, this is super cool. I think, there's a lot of good grant places. So no plans for a token anytime?
No plans for a token. I mean, honestly, like just to be totally honest with you, like we don't see a good place in the system for it. And it would just feel like we were shoving it into the system for the sake of having it. And honestly, the other thing is that, I mean, we talk a lot of it in the ecosystem about public goods. Like this really feels like a public good, right? Like the more, if you fragment the concept of a stealth address across several different implementations, several different like places where you have to look for these announcements and stuff, it only makes the user experience worse. So we think that Umbra and really stealth addresses in general is best, is most useful to the ecosystem if it's kind of like a standard and a public open thing that anyone can plug into. We feel like we want to steward that protocol to the point of adoption, but we think in the long term where value can be generated is from things built on top of it that use it, right? And so, like an invoicing service or a payment service or like an e-commerce system or any number of things could be built that take advantage of the stealth payments and be like good revenue generating businesses that may or may not have a token or something involved with them, who knows? But the core of Umbra itself, at least to date, nothing that we've encountered feels like it has the need for any kind of governance or token or anything else. It's pretty
the only place I would say maybe would be like if you had like say a token that generated the fees and then you minted the token to pay these guys so you could possibly pay them in a more anonymous manner.
So there is something there with the relayer system, right? Like how does that get maintained as a public good?
Yep.
One possibility is that the relayers just compete. Like right now, we run, I think maybe the only relayer service for Umbra, probably the only one. Anyone can build one. And we take a very small. We aim to have our relayer basically be neutral. Like we whatever we charge is what we pay for gas, because it's not like we're not trying to generate revenue from it. You could, in theory, at least be a relayer and have a market of relayers that were making profits just by relaying. The tolls themselves, it's the same concept. Like, yes, that technically generates quote unquote revenue, but it's so low. And we want it to be as low as possible because it's only there as a spam prevention method. The higher you make that, the more you discourage use of Umbra. So we try to keep that as low as possible. I mean, there's some things that require minor external user input, but on the whole, it really feels more like a protocol, a standard, than it does like a revenue generating project in some way.
No, it's super cool. Here, I'm gonna take you off. Take me off pinning.
Cool.
Anyway, so that was super cool. So I guess anything I missed as far as things go? Any big pieces?
I think we talked about most of the most interesting stuff.
I can ask just more of a vague question. So
sure,
as someone who started a privacy thing in the space, if you could go back, what would you do differently in this?
Really good question. I mean, I don't know what I would do differently, but I do know some of the challenges that we've learned from building a privacy solution. One of them is that if privacy is one of these things where everyone says that they care a lot about it, but their revealed preferences seem to be different. In other words, like
I
if
mean, this is
you
decentralization as a whole, I would
yes,
say.
yes, true. And I think privacy is an additional layer on top of that, right? Which is that it's very like people say that they want privacy, but any kind of additional friction or cost involved with getting that privacy, and they just bail and do something, do the easier thing, right? So we knew that, or we assumed that from the start, and so we worked really hard, for example, to make sure that Umbra's gas costs were absolutely minimal, so that we're not adding a bunch of additional costs to sending a stealth transaction as opposed to a normal transaction. But you really do have to like reduce that friction as much as possible, because the more that you have, the more people are going to drop off. Now, we think that Umbra is useful because we think that like commercial applications may be one area where some measure of privacy is more warranted, right? Like business, like users, it seems, don't care as much as maybe they quote unquote should, all right, about whether or not their individual transactions between each other are private. But companies, like, probably, again, like, do you want your salary paid in public? Do you want every vendor that you pay and the amount that you pay them to be public? Do you want like business deals between entities to be public and visible on chain? Like, probably not. And so we think that like these kind of commercial applications, a desire for some kind of system like Umbra will go up as more of these things start happening on chain. But yeah, so that's one thing I would say, is that people say they want privacy, but they actually, their preferences reveal that they don't. The second thing that makes building a privacy protocol really challenging, or privacy tool in general really challenging, is that there are some number of people who do care enough about privacy that they're willing to go through the trouble and the friction and whatever to get it. However, it's very hard to actually talk to those people and see what they want, because they're the kind of people who care a lot about privacy. So you can't just be like, like other kinds of
Right.
what's the like wisdom in a project or a startup? It's like, talk to your users and get feedback and learn from them. People who care a lot about privacy don't want to talk to you about it because
Right.
they're the kind of user who want privacy. So it's really hard to like know what users do or don't want, the ones that care, right? And it's hard to like get user feedback in that regard, even down to like we don't have Google Analytics on our site. We have only like very minimal backend analytics. Like, you kind of can't avoid having backend analytics. You're serving the page. So we have some like we have some sense of like how frequently we're serving the page and where we're supposedly serving it to. But other than that, we don't put analytics on the page, because we assume that people who care about privacy don't want to have themselves tracked and stuff like that. But that makes it harder. Like, that means we're like missing a lot of data that other projects have, right? Like, where are people dropping off in different parts of the flow? Like, we can't easily instrument that without disrespecting our users' privacy, and we don't want to do that. So it's
Yeah, but I mean, I would say that's
challenge.
it's almost even unnecessary, because it's not like you guys are losing to some other privacy solution at the moment.
Yeah, fair enough.
It's like there's just not nobody's really used as far as the privacy tool goes.
Yeah,
In
which is a
space.
shame, because I am in that camp. Like, I'm not a I don't know. I'm not an absolutist about privacy, but to me, it is obvious that it's important, and we should care
Right.
about it, and we should take steps to like build a more privacy, have more privacy options available to us, right? And so it is a little disheartening to see how we haven't made as much progress in that regard as I would like to see us make.
Yeah, cool. So I guess, and then do you guys have, I wanted to ask, do you guys have your own wallet for this that you guys have people use, or is it just normal?
So if you go to app.umbra.cash, that's the primary front end. It's all open source and everything, by the way, as well, on GitHub. And so you could run it locally. We've talked several times about publishing it on like IPFS or something like that. We should probably have an IPFS mirror, but right now it's just served app.umbra.cash. And it is not a wallet, and it does the trick that I talked about before, which is like having
It scans for your stuff.
Yeah, it has you sign the message to generate your Umbra specific private key. It does the scanning. It allows you to withdraw. It kind of looks and feels a little bit like a sort of like, special purpose wallet, because that's effectively what it's doing. But we haven't built like a standalone wallet. It just uses your standard MetaMask or other browser or Wallet Connect or whatever to
So it'll use
interact with.
like the MetaMask Web3 connection.
Yeah.
And,
Yep.
yeah. Nice.
Yeah, exactly.
Which is always fun to work with. I know.
Oh, of course, tons of fun. Well, I mean, and again, that goes back to this idea of like friction. Like in a in a kind of abstract sense, would it be better, like a utopian or idealistic sense, would it be better if it was like just a standalone like stealth wallet that you ran locally on your computer? Like, yes, that would be better. But like we would get nobody to adopt it if we required you to download and set up a new thing or whatever.
Right, is
before
just
you
plug
could
in
use it.
your node URL here that you're running. It's like,
Right, exactly. Yeah, that would be great. We would love that. That's where maybe we
right.
should be, but it's not where we're at. So this the front end is like it's a useful way to interact with the protocol. In the long run, what we'd like to see is have it baked into a bunch of stuff, including wallets, so that you don't even have to think about, like, it's not a client specific thing necessarily. Like Umbra shouldn't be an app. It should be something that undergirds like a bunch of use cases that people just use. Again, like like an invoicing service would be a perfect example of that, right? Where the invoicing service just integrates Umbra protocol. It's all happening there behind the scenes for you. You're getting the privacy, but you don't even know that you're like interacting with Umbra. That's probably that, and wallet integrations and other things like that are probably the right level for users to be interacting with it.
Nice. Super cool. Well, I think that's about all I have for you. Where can, I think you already mentioned app.umbra.cash. Anywhere else you want to point people to or have people look?
Sure. So we have a Twitter account, which is @UmbraCash, and you can follow for updates there. My personal Twitter is @BenDiFrancesco, at BenDiFrancesco. I tweet almost all about crypto and other nerdy dev stuff. So if that interests you, you can follow me. You can also check out. Thank you, appreciate it. And so I also have so Umbra is a project, our company is called ScopeLift. We're a small consultancy, a dev shop in crypto. We work on a bunch of different stuff. We do client work, we do our own projects. Umbra is one of our own projects, but so check out ScopeLift at ScopeLift as well, Twitter account. And if you need help in the space, if people are looking for high quality devs, we are always happy to chat.
All right. Yeah, I'm going to reach out with you some more questions. We'll have some fun.
Let's do it.
This was super fun. Thank
Agreed.
you for being my second privacy project. And now,
Yes.
yeah, thanks, and talk to you later.